Well, I'm talking about networks, and I will be talking about maps, something that, as you know, Martin Gardner wrote about, particularly with his April 1st column. But I'm going to particularly talk about the kinds of things that you can walk around and draw in one movement of the pen. And in particular, I'm not going to allow where you start at one place and finish at another. I'm going to insist that you start and finish at the same place. Now, if you do that, and we often do this with school kids to introduce them to this kind of problem, the one thing that you end up observing is that every location, every crossing point, every corner has to have at least an even number of ways in, because every time you come in, you go out. And that includes the first place where you start, where you go out and then come in. So every vertex, every node has to have an even number of places. And this was studied by Euler, and he solved the famous Königsberg problem where he had this network, which you can't do. So you can't take your Sunday walk crossing every bridge in Königsberg and returning to where you started. So everything has to have... Well, just once, exactly. Thank you, John. Yes, I'm insisting that you don't then retrace your steps over one of these. If you're allowed to retrace your steps, then it changes the number of lines that you count. So yes, drawing it exactly once. You don't need to know anything about that. The interesting thing is that we often say, well, if you can traverse it, then every node has to have an even number of roads coming in. This is fairly obvious. It's fairly clear. But the problem is, and the thing I complain about, is often when this is explained to students, it is left unspoken and they are left with the impression that the converse also works. And the thing is that to prove the converse is quite an interesting challenge. So there, if I give you a network where every node has an even degree, can you draw it, can you traverse it without lifting your pen off the paper? And lots of people go, yes, yes. Well, no, you can't. And lots of people have just gone, what? Because it might be disconnected. So if it's connected, and the thing is, you see, we have an additional condition that most people don't realize we have. And so people generally leave that as an unspoken extra condition. But no, let's suppose I'm now going to talk only about connected networks. So now I get that extra condition for free. And of course, if you go the other way, if you draw something, then you know that it can be drawn. That's fairly straightforward. And one of the things that you find, and the Doodle theorem, which I'm going to come to in a moment, is that you can actually shade this in a checkerboard fashion. So this goes back to the coloring idea. So if you think of this as a map and you want to color the map, you never need more than two colors. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but here is an interesting thing. If you can draw this without lifting your pen off the paper, I claim that you can draw it without lifting your pen off the paper and without crossing over a line that you have already drawn. So this is a situation that you're not allowed to have. Now, if you actually try this, if you try this with the double envelope thing, you find suddenly it becomes more difficult than you expect, because everybody just naturally does this and then they cross here, and that is wrong, because you then need to do this, and that would cross over a line you've already drawn. So when you come to a node, you have to ping off it rather than crossing over, and it suddenly becomes a more interesting question. Well, if you carry this extra condition, that the proof of the converse of the other one works for this as well. And in this particular case, here's an example where I've drawn that double envelope and I have pinged off each vertex. I've exploded each vertex slightly, so you can see that you can draw it without crossing. And the really cool part about this is a distorted circle, which has an inside and an outside. And I can color the inside. And now I have proven my Doodle theorem, that you can checkerboard color a doodle. Now, of course, this goes back to Martin Gardner with his April Fool's column, where he presented what appeared to be a map that could not be colored with four colors. And if you do start to deal with this in research type, then what we can do is, instead of having countries, we can have capitals. And if they share a border, then the capitals are joined by a road. And the countries inherit the color of the capital. And now we're stepping into the more abstract idea of coloring nodes that are connected, and we are released from having to be on the plane. And the interesting thing there is if you can two-color, which we can with doodles, if you can two-color, then every cycle must be even, because you go red, then blue, then red, then blue, and come back to where you started. Well, is the converse true? If every cycle is even, can you two-color it? And the answer turns out to be yes. And the first thing you try works, and if it fails, you've produced an odd cycle. So there's a really simple algorithm to say, can this be two-colored? We don't have a problem doing that. And I do this with 15 and 16-year-olds, and they like the coloring, they like the algorithm, and there's almost always one child who says, well, what about three-coloring? And what I say to that is, well, boom. Because that's P versus NP. Because three-coloring is NP complete, and it's worth $1 million. From the Doodle theorem to research math that is not yet sorted, and if you want to talk to me more about that, contact details, come and talk to me. Lots of people know me. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.